So hello, welcome. My name is Kalika. I am a motion designer and 2D character animator and video editor based in the New York City area. I run a training program called KalikaFX, and I also teach undergraduates and the afterwork crowd. So I wanted to show you guys what's up with the channels window today, which is one of the unsung heroes of Photoshop. It's really quite an amazing little window. It can be used with layer masks quite easily, and it's the name of its game primarily for me is to separate figure and ground, or separate line work from not line work. Okay, so I'm just going to show you guys in Photoshop what is, okay, now I need to open Photoshop, hold on. So I'm going to show you in Photoshop what you can do with the channels window. If you look in the chat, there is a link to work-along files. The work-along files are also linked down in this description. Now you may recognize this link from a previous live stream that I did, but I did add more files to it, so you should still download that. All right, fabulous. So let me begin here. So if you have your Photoshop open, go ahead and play along. And if you run into any problems at all, my friends, just type it into the chat right away whenever you have an issue, because there is a bit of a delay between when I show you something and when you actually get to see it. On the best of days, it's about a 5-second delay. On the worst of days, it's like a minute. So make sure that you type the questions as soon as they come into your mind, all right? Hi, Lyman, how's it going? It's good to see you. All right, fabulous. So yeah, as I'm explaining stuff, if anything isn't clear, just type it into the chat and I will be happy to clarify it, okay? Cool, so here I am in Photoshop. I'm gonna make a new film and video document just to show you guys what the channels window is all about, okay? So I'm gonna do a new HDTV document, and under color profile, just get in the habit of setting that to sRGB. I'm gonna hit create, and now I have my, my interface open. So on top of the background layer, I'm actually gonna make 3 new layers, each of which is gonna have a circle on it, okay? Okay, fine, go away, go away. Just a second. All right, fine. So anyways, I'm gonna make 3 circles on this layer just to show you guys what the channels window is all about. So here's a new layer that I've made, and I'm gonna make with the elliptical marquee a circle holding shift, okay? Now this tutorial, if you've not used much of Photoshop, it might be a little bit confusing, but if you are good with Photoshop already, if you're comfortable with making new layers, if you're comfortable with the interface and making selections especially, this is absolutely for you. All right, so here I have my circle that I've made, and I'm gonna fill it in with pure red. So I'm gonna click on my color chip here, and I'm gonna go over to this this section, and I'm going to change the red to 255, and the green and blue, I'm going to change those both to 0, and that's going to give me 100% red. And I'm just going to fill that in using the edit fill function, or shift F5. Carol asks, do you work at 72 DPI or PPI? The question, well, DPI doesn't really matter when it comes to video, interestingly enough. So you could be working at 1 DPI. As long as you have enough pixels in width and height, the video programs don't care. Now, if you're making something that might eventually go to print in addition to being in video, then you should work as big as you need to. So I would increase your DPI, I would increase the number of inches width by height to make sure that your pixel density is sharp enough for print, all right? So yeah, for video, it doesn't matter. The video programs, they just count pixels. So I'm gonna fill this in with red, and then I'm gonna take that selection area and move it over, and I'm gonna make a new layer, and this one I'm gonna fill in with green. So I'm gonna set that to 0, green is going to be 100%, and Shift F5 to fill that in. And then I'm going to move that selection area again, make a third layer here, and this one I'm going to fill with blue. So 0 and 255. Now this is RGB color, right? And with RGB color, Shift F5 to fill. With RGB color, this is what's known as additive color. So the more color you put on top of itself, the brighter everything gets. So we have red, green, and blue, and I'm going to just do a little demo of what additive color does before we dive fully into the channels window. So my background, I'm going to set that to black, okay? So if I just do Command I, Control I on a PC, that's going to change it to pure black. And then all of these guys, I'm going to change their blending mode to add, okay? And now you can see our colors, how they overlap. So red plus green equals yellow, green plus blue equals cyan, red plus blue equals magenta, and all three colors together give you white, okay? That's additive color. Now, what does this mean in terms of channels? Well, I'm so glad you asked. If you go into the channels window, the channels window is going to show you a black and white representation of what pixels are assigned to what color. So if we have the red here, so I'm just going to keep comparing between the RGB and just the red. So if we're just looking at the red here, see how it's only where the red circle is? That's because it isn't bleeding into any other areas. If I look at just the green channel is showing me that there's only green in this area, and the blue channel is showing me that there's only blue in this area. Now, what if I blurred one of these layers? Well, if I take my blue layer and I just simply attach or put the effect or filter of a Gaussian blur on it, and I'm just going to increase the blur amount pretty significantly so that it kind of puffs out quite a bit. And unfortunately, it's not giving me a preview. Okay, so this seems to think that I'm trying to do it on the channel. Let me try that again. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. I'm just going to increase that a bunch. Okay, cool. So that did not actually blur my, it did not blur. Let me try again. I didn't have the RGB selected in the channels window. Sometimes that can affect it too. So we'll do Gaussian blur again. There we go. So now it's got like this haze around it, right? So when we look in the channels window, what you're gonna end up seeing is black, white, and gray. So when you see the gray, that means that that color is sort of there, all right? Okay, awesome. Now sometimes what you might get when you're doing like logo style artwork, let me just invert this again and change all these guys to normal. So you might end up with some kind of, I'm just going to set this to normal. Okay. So you might end up with, I'm going to pretend this is just like a terrible logo, and I'm just going to save it, quick save as PNG. All right. Now this happens sometimes, like you'll be given a logo from a client, and even though you ask for an EPS or an Illustrator file, they give you a PNG file that has no transparency, or a JPEG file that has no transparency, and they don't have any other version of it. And then you're like, all right, well, how do I separate this? Now, what most people do who aren't familiar with channel operations, also known as chops for nerds in the know, is they will use the magic wand tool, or they'll use just like, okay, here we go. So here's my bad logo, right? It's a PNG file. So what most people would do is they would go over to their quick select tool and they would click on the white area and just hope that it gets everything, right? And then you would invert your selection, and then you would extract it to a new layer and so on. Now this works sometimes. New layer via copy. This works sometimes, but it's not always foolproof. So let me just fill this in with black to see how it did. There we go. Yeah, you see how the edges are kind of gross? And that's because I used the quick select tool. The quick select tool is not as precise as using the channels window. So let me show you how I would isolate a bad logo such as this using the channels window. And matter of fact, why don't I drop this right into our photos for the class. I'll just put it directly into this folder here, not in photos for the class. It's just called bad logo. Okay, so if you have our BitLink open and you refresh, you'll find bad logo in there. Okay, all right. So how would I select this using my channels? Well, I'm so glad you asked. And again, if you have any questions, just type them into the chat as soon as you can, and then I'll be happy to answer those. If you wait, then there's an even longer lag. There's a lag between when I talk to you and you actually get the video. So anyway, so here's RGB if I look at the channels window. But if I click on just the red, it shows me these two. If I click on just the green, it shows me those two. And if I click on just the blue, it shows me these two, which is kind of confusing. And the reason for this is that it is showing us what has blue in it and what doesn't have blue in it. So these like Mickey Mouse ears that we're seeing are the areas where there's no blue in the image. This for green is showing us where there is no green, which is to say the red area and the blue area. And right here, this guy is showing us where there is no red. Because remember, when you combine red, green, and blue together, you end up with that white. So there is red, green, and blue in the whole area surrounding our image. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to select all of this stuff using our channels. So let me see. If I hold the command key down, control on a PC, and I click on just the red, it's going to highlight what looks like the green and the blue. But if I zoom out, you'll see that it's actually selecting everything but the green and the blue. Now, if I hold Command and Shift, you'll notice, okay, maybe you'll notice there's like a little hand with a plus next to it. That means I can add to the selection. So Command Shift and click on the red one, sorry, the green one, and it's adding this to the selection. Okay, so this is, let's try again. So if I just do Command D for deselect, then it's gonna hide that stuff, okay? So Command click is gonna select that. Great, so now I have that selected. So over here, what I can do is I can make a layer mask. Now a layer mask, basically what you're doing is you're just going down here to the bottom of your layer panel. Oh, you can't see that because my head is over it. So let me just move that up. So here at the bottom of the layer panel, there's like a rectangle with a circle punched out from it. And you're going to click on the Add Layer Mask button. Okay, and notice that inverted, it selected the stuff that I actually wanted. So if I if I alt click or option click to get into the layer thumbnail, then I can actually mess with the layer thumbnail itself. So here I can do image adjustments invert or Command I. And I use Command I quite a bit when I'm working with layer masks. And then I can click back on my color image. I can make a new background. And this time I'm going to use my hideous background color method, patent pending, which basically means that when I'm selecting something, I make sure that there's like a random color that's not part of the rest of the image. Oh, hi Lenine, welcome. So I'm just gonna double click on this color here and I'm gonna go over. I'm gonna choose orange because orange isn't part of everything. And actually I should select some sort of like a dark-ish orange or brown so that way I can see the value contrast as well. Then I'm gonna do my Shift F5 to fill my empty layer with that foreground color. And if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So now I want to select this area and look at this, like it's already starting to look better on the edge. It's not seamless, but we'll work on that, all right? No problem. So I'm going to go back to my color. I'm going to turn off my layer here and I'm going to disable my layer mask. So if I hold the Shift key down and I click, that's going to disable the layer mask temporarily. I'm going to go back into my channels and I want to just get the red over here. So if I Command click the thumbnail for the blue, and then if I Alt Command click the red, nope, that didn't work. Let's try again. So Command click and then Alt Command. I keep getting the wrong one. Let's try just this guy here. Okay, so now I have just the green. Let's turn on all of them. So this one's the green and it's just selecting the red and I want to get rid of the red. So Alt Command. That's just giving me the green. Let's try. It's a little bit of a mind bender. Alt Command. Oh, I keep getting the green. So anyways, I'm just gonna do this one because it's gonna give me the red in there, right? And then what I can do is go back to my layers, Alt click to get into my layer mask. And I don't want to mess with this part because it actually looks pretty decent. So I'm going to deselect part of it using my polygonal lasso tool. So remember, with the selection tools, you can always turn them into deselection tools by holding the Alt key, and then it gives you this little minus next to it. And then I'm just going to click and click here and then come out over here. And I don't want this section selected because otherwise it's going to mess. I forgot. I need to invert my selection. Let me invert my selection. There we go. And then I can Alt click. Okay. And the reason why I'm Alt clicking to get rid of this green circle on the right is because I don't want to mess with its edge. I thought that the edge looked pretty good. So now I can fill this in with white just by going to Edit, Fill, and choosing Contents White. Okay, and then I'm going to deselect, and I just pay attention to these little types of things. B for brush, making sure that I'm not using some kind of a fancy brush. I want to make sure that I'm using like just a decent sized brush. I'm just going to paint that tiny edge. You see that? It's like a gross little edge. I'm going to paint that away. Okay? So basically, using channel operations, I separated out this bad logo from its background. But I am noticing that there's a little bit of crunch on the edge here. Okay? So what you can do to remove that crunch is just come over here to your layer mask thumbnail, and you can Command click to select it. And then what I like to do is I like to shrink my selection just slightly using Select, Modify, Contract. And I'm just going to contract by 1 pixel. Okay, and then I'm going to do something a bit sneaky. The thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in here. Okay, and I'm going to analyze what this looks like. And maybe I need to undo the contract. And I'm seeing that it's just like half a pixel almost. So I'm going to invert my selection so that it's just selecting the stuff on the outside. See that? And then I can hide my little dancing ants by doing Command H. Whoops, hide extras. Okay. And then I'm going to swap my fill and stroke, grab my paintbrush tool, and I'm just going to paint here. And see how it gets rid of that like half pixel size? So I didn't actually need to contract my selection in this case, though that is helpful sometimes. What I noticed was that it wasn't a full pixel too big. It was half a pixel too big. And that too, it was only a half a pixel too big on the red and the green. So I'm just hand painting the red and the green out so that it looks better. Okay, and we're going to do a little comparison between this method and our traditional like quick select method so that you can see how much cleaner this ends up being. And the more complex your logo gets, friends, the more of a difference you're really going to start to see. Okay, so are there any questions on what I did here with the selecting the different channels and working with the layer mask? And the thing to keep in mind, friends, when you're working with the layer mask is that you always want to be on the layer mask itself when you click in the layer panel if you want to paint in the layer mask. If you want to make choices here, then you do it on the layer thumbnail. Carol asked in the chat, so you select inverse and clean up. Exactly. That's all I did. So I just command clicked the thumbnail, and then I noticed that it was the stuff that I wanted, and I actually inverted the selection using select inverse, and then I zoomed in, I clicked on the layer mask, and then I painted away those white edges. I hid my selection areas by doing Command H, and then I was able to do that. Okay? Great question, Carol. I'm glad you asked. So I'm going to open the bad logo once more. I'm just going to compare for you guys. Let me just save this as a Photoshop file. There used to be this cool thing where you could like, oh, I think I know where it is. Image, yes, image duplicate. So if I do image duplicate, it makes a copy of the whole entire document. And then I can go into my history. And in this guy, this is my original, go all the way back to the beginning. So here this is going back to the beginning just so that you can see the difference. So if I use my quick select tool, or worse, the magic wand, and then I select the inverse and I do the mask, and then I do my new layer and I fill it with this brownish color. Fill, foreground, go. Look at these edges. That is so gnarly compared to these edges, which are significantly less gnarly, right? All right, any other questions about what I've done here so far? Okay, so that's the basics. And now we're gonna get a little bit deeper into the more complex stuff, all right? So the file that we're gonna use for this is our channels.jpg. So if you were in my other live stream where I was going over the selection tools, I had this in there as well, but this time we're actually gonna use it for our channels. So in Photoshop, I'm gonna do File menu, I'm gonna do Open, and I'm gonna choose that channels image. Okay. And one thing that folks like to do is they like to take clouds from one image and put them on top of another photo, right? So if that's the case, what do you do? Just a moment, sorry. So here's what you do. First, you go over to your channels and you look at each of your channels to find out which one has the highest contrast. And it's funny, when I started doing this kind of stuff, I would always put my money on blue. I was like, oh yeah, it's a sky, it should totally be the blue channel, but it's not. If I go up here, I can actually see that the red channel is the one that has the most contrast. Yes, it also has the most noise, but it has the most contrast between figure and ground. So how do you take it from the channels window and move it over into the actual layers? What you do is this. You select the channel that you want, and you do select all. Then you copy it. And please, if you have any questions at all, just type them right into the chat. So you copy it, then you go back to your RGB version, you go to your layers, and you do edit, paste special, paste in place, which should make a new layer for you. Now if it doesn't, you can make a new layer and you can do it right in there. So here was my red, Command A, gonna go over to my layers, select layer 1, Command Shift V, should give me it, and it's not. Let's try selecting all the channels, and now, yes. So you have to make sure that all your channels are selected before you paste into a new layer, all right? And so I have this here, and I'm going to make this super high contrast. And I find that the best way to do this is with a smart object, so I'll do convert to smart object. Then I'll do Command L for levels, and I'll just pump up my levels a whole bunch. And I want to make all of the sky go black. And you can actually combine different layers to get like a really good matte. So I want some areas to be semi-transparent, so just be mindful of that. But I usually do like a hard matte first, and then I'll add more to it. So this is going to be like my hard matte. And then I make a new layer on top, and I'm going to paint this stuff. See these shadows? I'm going to paint those in. So I select that top layer, and with my paintbrush or my selection tools, I'm just going to create like little areas for those shadows. Okay, now I'm going to do this a little bit rough because I do want to show you guys some more techniques today, but this is super helpful, especially when you're working with skies or you're working with things that have like uncertain edges. Okay, so yeah, something like that. And then I'm going to fill that in with white. So I just hit D and that set it to my default colors. Then I hit X and it swaps foreground and background. And then I'm going to fill it in using Shift F5. Okay, and deselect with a good old Command D. And I can see that that's a little harsh. So B for brush, and then I'm just going to make that a little less hard on the edge. And maybe come over here and use my soft edged brush to just paint this. Okay, so then you're probably asking like, well, what do you do about like combining this stuff? So I'm glad you asked that, actually, even if you didn't ask it out loud. The way that you combine these things is like this. So I'm just going to fill all this in here, okay? Fill, 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 and fill. So we're mostly going to be paying attention to this particular cloud, all right? So I'm just going to zoom out here. And what you do is you combine these guys using a group, Command G, and then I dupe the group or duplicate the group by dragging it down to the new layer icon. And now I have two of them. And then I merge the group. So I click on the little hamburger flyout and I do merge group. Okay, and this is like super non-destructive, right? Because I want to be able to revisit this group in the future, and I want to provide options for me to do that. So now I select all this, I copy it, I go to my background here, just going to duplicate that as well, and turn off the original. And I'm going to make a layer mask on this. Okay, so just an empty layer mask. I want to get into that layer mask, so remember Alt click to get into it, and then I'm going to paste that that thing, paste in place, yeah, which I had copied from Group 1 Copy. And when I go back to it, you can see that the clouds have been cut out pretty okay. Let me make a new hideous background color here. Just going to double click that chip, come over here and just fill it in. Shift F5. Okay, and so now I can see that that's not too bad in terms of selection. I can always, I think it's Alt click. Yeah, you can always Alt click to solo one of your layers, and then you can see like whether you actually did a good job or not. I can see that, you know, some parts of it are not as good, but I can always revisit my group and then come back in here, and maybe I want to like select part of a different channel of my original. So if I go over here and I'm just like scrolling through, okay, maybe I want to revisit this little section. And this is exactly what I would do for doing hair cleanup too. So I'll show you that in a moment. So right here, if I just select this little area, boop, and then I do copy, and then I go back to RGB, I go back to my group and make a new layer on top, and then I do edit, paste in place. Oh no, that selected something weird. Let me redo that. I probably had something funky selected. So here in my channels, here's my red, copy, 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 and then let's make a new layer and edit, paste in place that. There we go. It might have been the groups that was causing the confusion. I'm not sure. Let me just pull that little piece up. Okay, and now I can continue to finesse this. So any questions so far on what I've been doing? I know it's like a lot of kind of different way of using Photoshop than maybe what you're used to, but it can be pretty fun. So let me just make that a little darker. And you see how I'm getting more cloud definition there? And then I'm gonna make the whites a little brighter. And don't worry about that seam so much. I can always paint that over, but I do wanna get the black as I can. And that's pretty nice. I'm gonna hit okay. And then I'm gonna make another new layer for just painting. And then I'm just, woo, that's not the right color. Let me just go back to white on black. So any questions on this, friends? Any questions on this? Okay, and then let me just revisit the levels. So this is why I turn my layers into smart objects, is so that if I need to make a change to the settings, I can always do more. Carol asked another great question in the chat. So you use levels to create edges or contrast? I would say I use levels in order to create both. So sometimes I'm using it to create just the edge. Other times I'm using it to like delineate what's the background from the foreground, and sometimes to get the like the middle stuff happening. I know that's like a little, it's not quite answering your question, but it's a combination. In other words, levels is used to create the matte and to create components of the matte. So now if I compare what I used to have for my matte in that section to what I have now, it's looking a lot more precise. So I would once again duplicate the group, merge it, select all of it, copy it, then go into my matte here, alt click, and then edit, paste in place. Okay? All right, so I hope that helped to answer your question, Carol. Let me know if you have any follow-ups. These are good. All right, so awesome. So that's starting to look a lot better. But if you are planning on using this type of thing, this type of technique, and you're going to put these clouds on a different background, just make sure that you adjust the color of the clouds to match the new background. Because like, for example, if I wanted these clouds to be on this magenta background, they still have that blue color cast. So what I would probably do is take this, turn it into a smart object just so that I have more flexibility in terms of the color. And then I would do my Command U to get my hue, and I would probably desaturate it a bit and then swivel the hue until I get to something more toward magenta. And then you see how that like feels better overall. I'm still not done with this mat. I mean, look at these giant areas that are just straight up missing, but this cloud in particular is really starting to look a lot better. Carol says, yes, sort of. You really got to just practice it, my friends. Just like go in there and like try to make a mat for something like clouds. Try to make a mat for something like a person with curly hair and so on. And then it'll make more sense to you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next section, which is coloring line work. And I have some terrible photos that I took right here of these drawings that I did, which were ink on paper. So I'm going to open those in Photoshop. So just doing a good old open with. I'm going to choose Photoshop. I hope that's the right version. Are you really going to open a new Photoshop? Forget it. I'm going to open it from Photoshop itself. Okay. Carol says, I have done channel things before. Good, I'm glad. I could tell from your artwork. So the levels, just to go back to that, I use the levels to increase the contrast on the section of a photo at a time. So I use the channel, like I select the section of the channel that I want to work with, and then I isolate that, right, to a new layer. I turn on the smart object thing and I do levels in order to increase contrast just for that section. And then once I have the contrast the way I want it for that section, then I combine it with other parts of the high contrast photo that I'm making that's going to be used as the layer mask. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you have more questions, please continue to ask in the chat. All right, so I'm going to open up these two images. All right, and first I need to rotate. So I'm blanking on how to do this. Hold on. Yeah, there we go. Edit. Image rotation. There we go. I want to do a 90 degrees counterclockwise. Okay, and I'm just going to isolate, like I'm going to combine this with the other photo, and I'm going to use these pegs to align my photos together. Okay, so Lyman says, I've never done channels, all new to me, but I've been waiting to see what you do with the line art. You're in luck, Lyman. So here's my photo of my hippo drawing, and then I have this photo of my background, because the hippo obviously is in the circus. So I'm going to do image rotation 90 degrees counterclockwise, and then I'm just going to combine this image with the other one by pulling this off. Okay, now it's a separate tab, and I'm just going to drag this layer onto here, and I think if I hold shift, yeah, it keeps the alignment. Okay, and I'm going to rename this guy the background, and I'm going to rename this guy my hippo. And I'm going to combine these two. I'm just going to start off with a little multiply action just so that I can take my hippo and line art and line them up using my pegs. Okay, so these are animation pegs. Those of you who know my background might or have taken my NYU classes might recognize the pegs from the Acme punch that we use for animation. So I'm just going to do a little transform on this. Yeah, I think that's close enough. I'm just going to leave it like that. Anyway, so I'm going to change multiply to off, and I'm going to increase the opacity back up again. And I'm going to hit C for crop. I'm just going to crop this in a little, because I don't need to see the number at the bottom. This is set to a 16:9 aspect ratio, so I'm just going to pull this guy over and just crop it nicely. Okay, cool. So the first thing that I do here is I like to just turn all of this to black and white. So I do Command U, and let's convert these to smart objects to just make things more non-destructive. So Command U, and I just drop the saturation all the way down, okay? But you'll notice that now it's gray on white. Don't worry about it, we'll be okay. I do like the way that the line work looks, and I don't want to lose that quality. And what a lot of folks do when they have line work is this. Just you wait, it looks horrible. They will, let me just duplicate this guy, and I'm just gonna flatten it to itself. Convert to layer. Yes. Okay, so they do this. Then we'll do some levels. So we'll make the white turn to black. I mean, the gray turn to white. There we go. So there's my gray turn to white. Yay. And then they're like, yeah, now I want to color it. So they'll choose a color. Hippos are what? Purplish in cartoons, like purple gray. And then they'll take their paint bucket, which you can get to by clicking and holding the gradient if you don't see it. And then they'll come over here and they'll click, and they'll click, and they'll click. And then you zoom in and you'll see that the edges are starting to get a little bit compromised. I'm not a huge fan of the paint bucket tool because it does weird things. Like, you see how I have this sort of like white edge that's showing up? And if you're an illustrator and if you are concerned with line integrity, this is going to make you a little nuts. So I would, you know, continue to fill this, and you're just going to be like, cringe, cringe. Okay, so that's starting to affect my line quality. Like, you see this? This had like more beef to it on the, it had more substance to it on the ear. And when I did the fill, it like screwed it up. The levels in the fill like really, really screwed it up. So how do you like fix this? Well, here's how. First of all, I'm gonna do my levels right here on the smart object layer, okay? So I'm gonna do Command L, and I'm gonna take the gray and I'm gonna turn it white, but I'm not gonna go too far with it, okay? We're also, yeah, something like that. And I can increase, I can make my black a little darker if I want to, but yeah, something like that should work pretty good, okay? And what we want is for the line work to actually be separated from the paper. So here's what we're gonna do. We're actually gonna, it's like a sort of two-part process here, okay? And I actually have a document on it, so let me pull up the document because I don't want to screw this up. It's like really important. So channels method, channels. Hold on just a sec. Give me a moment, all right? Just gonna pull this up so that you guys can like kind of play along if you want to. There we go. Yep, this is the one. Okay. Just a moment. Yes, this is it. I thought it was too short, so let me just copy this. Change. Anyone with a link? Okay, I'm going to copy the link and I'm going to put that right into the chat. Okay, so this is like, it's a really long link, but hopefully it'll get you to the right place. So I have my my picture and I've done the levels on it. And let me just do a little bit more levels on it. Okay. So if you're on this document, which I just dropped into the chat, you'll be able to follow along. I'm on step 10. So if you have more than drawing with the same contrast, you can save the preset. We're not going to do that. And you can, of course, use the selection tools to select areas that are obviously not part of your picture. So I have like this dot here, for example. So I would like probably paint that out if I needed to. And then I'm going to get like a, okay. Okay, so this guy is my like original hippo image. We're going to go to the channels window for this, and we're going to go over here in the channels. We're going to go to the ring of fire. So down at the very bottom of the layer, the channels window is what I call the ring of fire. And it says load channel as selection. Now, because all of our channels have the same information, loading the channel as a selection is giving us everything. Okay? And then I can go back to my layers. I can make a new layer. I can call it line, and I can fill it in with the color that I want for my line work. And maybe I want that to be like a super dark brown. Okay? Edit, fill. Whoops, I forgot to invert. So ring of fire, invert, yep, select inverse, all right, and then do the edit fill. Okay, and then if I turn on my background, you can see that the character is all by itself on that background, okay? And if I made a brand new layer with some kind of like neutral gray for my background color, I'm gonna do Alt-Delete to fill that in. Just drag that up. You can see that it has like perfectly isolated just my line work. Now this can be really, really nice to work with, okay? So I'm gonna do that one more time because it is like a little bit fussy. So to start off with, let me just go back and discard my hue and saturation and levels here. Okay, so this was my original hippo artwork, and I want to turn it into just the line work. Okay, and the way that I do it is by first doing hue and saturation. So image, adjust, hue and saturation, drop the saturation all the way down. And it doesn't have to be a smart object. I just prefer for it to be a smart object so that any changes that I make to this are completely non-destructive. And again, the how-to on this, I'll put that into the description as well. It's currently in the live chat if you're watching live. So here's my desaturated hippo. Then I'm going to do Command L to remove or change the white, or the areas that are supposed to be white to actually be white. So I'm just zooming like this. And whenever you do this process, friends, make sure that your zoom is set to at least 100%, if not bigger, okay? All right, so I've fixed my levels there. Okay, so now we have what looks like a pretty good black and white image. And then what I do is I go over to the Channels tab. I click on the ring of fire down at the bottom here, which means select channel at, load channel as selection. And then I invert that selection because right now what's selected is just the white parts. So I go to select, I go to inverse, and now it's just selected the line work. I go back to layers and make a new layer, okay? I fill that layer with whatever color I want my line work to be. Maybe I want it to be like a really deep blue. And then I do edit, fill, and fill that selected area with my line work color. And now if I deselect, you can see that the line work has been isolated. Okay, now this leaves us with the question, how do you then fill it but still maintain the line integrity? Well, I'm so glad you asked. You would duplicate that layer, right? So this is my line, and then this one underneath is going to be my line plus fill, okay? And on my line plus fill layer, I'm going to choose my like hippo gray. And then I can use my paint bucket. And my edges are not going to be gnarly because my line layer is like covering it up, okay? And I find that that kind of works, that sort of works pretty well. It does beef up your color a little bit. So if that's you, what you might prefer to do is to just paint it by hand. So that's doable as well. What I would do in that case is I would make my new layer and I would paint underneath of it like this. Oh, that's a soft brush. Gross. Let me turn that to a harder brush. So I would paint underneath of it like so, and making sure that my flow is set to 100% so that I actually get that color. And having that paint underneath, then, you know, it frees you up so that you could then potentially animate this character and so on. Whereas if you have it on multiply, it kind of limits what you can do and what you can put it on in terms of background. Okay, so this would be just my fill layer. Are there any questions on that whole process? All right, so now I'm going to move on to the part that you guys have probably been waiting for, which is how to isolate a person with curly hair onto a brand new background. And I started doing this in the selection video that I did a few days ago, a week ago, something like that. But I didn't get to quite finish. And it's a little bit of a challenge, but I think it'll definitely be worth it for you guys to learn how to do. So here's my layer masks JPEG. That's what I'm going to call this lady. And this photo is from pexels.com. And the process for doing this type of thing involves a decent amount of observation, but you also have to combine mattes together in order for this to work. So when I did the select subject option, it didn't do a great job. It thought about it. It's got like artificial intelligence built into Photoshop now, right? So you would think that it would do like a decent enough job, but wasn't my favorite. So when I do layer new via copy, and then I make a new background underneath, and then let's just make this like this dark purple color. Whoops. Alt delete. It looks okay from a distance, but when you zoom in, you'll see that the edges are pretty crunchy. The hair is okay, but also pretty crunchy, especially when you compare it to the original. Like it cut off a decent amount of hair. Okay, so how do you eliminate that? How do you make it like kind of better? Well, it's a combination of things, especially when you're dealing with something that has soft edges, like how she has this kind of fuzzy jacket on. You would want to probably like select some of that independently of the rest of it. I don't think this did a great job with the edge itself, but it did a decent enough job with what's called the core, or the inner part of our subject here. So if you want to like continue to add to it, remember you can always use the quick mask tool. So you can command click on the layer thumbnail that you have already selected, right? And then you can go back to your background and hit Q to get to the quick mask tool. And then you can zoom in and you can paint out those areas, right? So I'm gonna do B for brush, X to swap foreground and background, and now I can like paint stuff, right? I could even make the paintbrush a little less hard so that I can like really get like that nice soft edge. And when I'm doing the quick select, I just keep swapping between foreground and background by hitting the X key, okay? But that's not channels. That's not what we're here for today. So let me show you how you would use channels to modify and enhance the whole quick mask process. So once you have something selected using quick mask, hold on, there we go, command minus a bunch of times. What you can do is hit Q again, then make a new layer, and you can set your colors to default using D, that's black on white. I'm just gonna fill all of this in with white, okay? So edit, fill, and fill with white, fine, okay? So I do it this way just because I like to kind of keep track of everything. And then I would start to work on, like, because I can paint the jacket. That's not a big deal. I'm more concerned about her hair and her skin. So I'm going to click on the background layer and I'm going to go up here to channels. And in the channels, I'm going to switch between these different channels. How do you get to quick mask? Great question, Carol. To get to quick mask, first you have to have a selection. So you would command click to get the selection, and then you would hit Q. Now, if you don't have a selection, so command D, now I don't have a selection, and you hit Q, you won't actually see the red. So it helps to have at least something selected to kind of get you started. And when you do the quick mask, just by hitting Q, or you can click this little guy down here, that'll take you like back and forth to quick mask and not sometimes. Why are you being this? This is forsaking me. It's, hold on, here, Q, very strange. It's like acting up for some reason. Let me see. Let me just try this really quick. It says that it's there. For some reason, my quick mask wasn't working. So when it's on, it's like this dark contrasty version, and when it's off, it's not. Press, and now it's active. So I command clicked on layer 1 in order to select that area, and then I clicked back to the background to continue making changes. And after, so I did this. Let me just exit quick mask, deselect. I command clicked layer 1, which had my selection. Then I hit Q. So once you have something selected using quick mask, hold on, there we go, command. Okay, do you guys see me now? Sorry about that. My computer like randomly restarted. It totally has a mind of its own today. So I gotta go back to my image of that lady. That's channels. Let's see. Yes, all right. So, let's see if we can get my lady back. Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks for sticking around, you guys. You're the best. So let's see. I guess it didn't save what I did with that lady, but I can get that lady back. So let me open the lady. I'll bring her back again and Sorry, friends. My connection like dropped for no reason. Let's get our lady layer masks. That's what she's called. It's coming. It's coming. And I'm going to quit everything else in an effort to have this not get hung up. Okay, so what I had started with was my select subject tool, right? So I went to select menu, and I went to select subject, and that should do an okay job for your initial selection, and then you can come back into it and you can like make more changes. So I did my Command or Control J to extract that selection to a new level. And then if you want to go back into that selection and make further changes, what you would do is Command click on the thumbnail, hit Q to get into your quick select mode, and then you can come back in here and continue to add stuff to it, right? So B for brush, and whenever you want to add stuff to it, you would want to use the white. So I do D for my default colors, and then X to swap foreground and background. So now I can come over here and I can paint. And if I want that to be a softer brush, I could right click and I could say, hey, let's tone down that softness, right? Okay, fabulous. So X to swap again, and now I can soften this edge here. And I find that it's generally better to select less. Nobody knows really what this woman's sweater looks like, except for the woman whose sweater it is. So I don't think most people are gonna mind if the edge is clean, but not exactly the way the edge of her sweater is. So I just sort of like paint it with that softish brush, and then keep hitting X to swap between foreground and background. But that's not why we're here today, right? We're here today to learn about channels and how channels can help us. And when we look at the hair on this lady, look at the hair on this lady, it's not ideal. So if I hit Q again, and let me just make a new layer here, I'm going to fill that new layer with white. So D for default colors, X to swap foreground and background, and Alt Delete to fill that in, right? And then Command D to deselect. All right, so if I look at this woman and give her that hideous background color that I know and love, double clicking that top color chip and just gonna go for like this purplish color, Alt Delete, there we go. The hair is not looking great. Like, you see how this pink is showing up? She does not actually have pink hair. Like, that's just wrong. So how do we fix that? Well, we can start with our initial like selection that we made, right? Like, that wasn't terrible. I did mess with it somewhat. I would probably mess with it further if I was doing this as a real professional job. But to fix the hair, I would need to go into the channels. So to start off with, I would turn off all this, go back to my background, and I would go over to my channels, and I would just analyze the channels and see which one is giving me the best contrast between foreground and background. And here it looks like the blue might be doing the trick. I think the blue is pretty good for this area here. So I would take my lasso tool, L for lasso, and I would select just this hair right here, right? And then I would copy it and deselect, come back over to my layers, make a new layer, and edit, paste in place. Okay, so now I have that little section done. And then I would smart object that. I would Command L, not Command K, Command L, and then I would adjust my range there, right? So I would probably do the white first. So remember, the rightmost slider is to adjust your white, and then I would adjust my black just a touch. You don't want to go too far with it. Okay, and so that would give me that nice hair edge. I'd hit OK. But notice the mat that I started making was white. Okay, so here's what I do. I make a new layer and I fill it with black. So Alt-Delete fills it with black. I'm going to take these 3 layers that comprise my mat, or are going to comprise my mat, and I select, click and shift click, Command G to make a group out of them. And then I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to invert it. Okay, and you see how that just sort of plopped it right into the scene. Another thing that I do sometimes is I will go to my blending modes and depending on what I need to happen, like if I want to drop out the black and just add to what's already there, I would do screen. If I want to add the white to whatever's there, I would do add. Other times I'll just leave it at normal, and that gives me a nice sort of subtle edge. And then I would continue to add more areas with sometimes different channels just by repeating that same process. So L for lasso, select this section next. And hair is tough. If you've ever tried to clean up hair, it's difficult. So here's our blue, our green, and our red, and I think once again our blue, but for this section it might be a slightly different levels adjustment. So I'm going to once again copy that, then go back to RGB, go back to my group, make a new layer, deselect, and paste. Whoops, I was supposed to paste in place. So edit, paste special, paste in place. Okay, and I could invert it before I do the levels, or before I even do the smart object. Right click smart object, and then Command L, and then adjust my black level. And with the smart object, there is a bit of a delay, so just be mindful of that. And then just continuing to like pull and push these sliders until I get the range that I want with this. And then of course, like go in and adjust your, like play with your blending modes until you get a mat that works for you. Like I kind of like to just keep it a little bit subtle, and then I would make my new layer on top and I would paint, whoops, X to swap foreground and background. And maybe I would just do something like this, right? Okay, so again, in order to get this part to turn into a mat for this part, what I gotta do is I got to dupe the group, right? So I duplicated the group, then I'm gonna merge the group, merge group, then I'm gonna select it all, copy it, duplicate my original, make a new layer mask, alt click to get into it, and then edit, paste special, paste in place, and drag it above my hideous background color. And it's starting to get there, but not quite. So what you can do, and this is a bit of a cheat, some people like it, some people don't, is you can take your whole layer and duplicate it, right? Then you can alt click right into there, and you can use your dodge and burn tools to get this to be higher contrast. So if you've ever done darkroom photography, there are dodge and burn tools in Photoshop to replicate that. So if you want something to be brighter, you dodge it. I used to take like a pencil and I'd put a little disc of paper on it so it looked kind of like a fake lollipop, and I would just put that under the enlarger, the darkroom enlarger, to like keep certain areas from getting too bright, or keep certain areas from getting too dark. And then the burn tool was like if I wanted areas to get darker, and I would usually have like a sheet of cardboard with a hole cut in it, and then I would put that under the enlarger. But in a pinch, you can use your hand, like set up like this, which is why the hand tool, which is why the burn tool has that icon, right? So this is our fake lollipop, which is going to keep areas from getting too dark. This is our burn tool, which is going to make certain areas darker. So we actually want to use the dodge tool for this. And we want to take midtones and make them beefier. So I'm going to come over here and just do that. Okay, and then if I need to make certain areas darker again, I can use the burn tool and just click a little bit to make those darker again. And then when I go back to my color image, it's starting to get a little bit better. Another trick that I've used before is to just straight up go in there and paint. Alt click to get in there, B for my brush, and I just choose like a really, really tiny brush. Like I'll make it really quite small, and I'll use my Wacom pen and tablet to just paint in those lines there. Nobody needs to know. And if your color starts to get a little bit funky, what you can do is you can like actually make a clone stamp layer, or you can like make a paint layer that's going to show this little area. Remember also that you can click on your little thumbnail image for the layer mask and just go in and paint by hand like this. Okay. And of course, if you think that you'll be able to get better results using more channel operations, by all means, you should do it. Another thing that I'll do sometimes, just because like I'm really picky about putting things on new backgrounds, is I'll actually just paint in here with a different color. So I'll like alt click to get this like dark brown color, and then I'll come in here with like a kind of larger brush. And because whatever is white in this image is going to end up showing through, I just like paint on the actual image, and then I do this, and then that can make it look just a little cleaner, you know, because it doesn't have that color cast. I did a little too much. It got on her face. That looked bad. But this way it doesn't have the color cast of your original background. And just like keep switching up your color so that it doesn't flatten out. You can also, or alternatively, use your rubber stamp tool, right? This being your rubber stamp tool, and use that to clean it up. So I could do like alt click or option click with my rubber stamp tool, like let's say over here, and then I could rubber stamp some of that stuff over here. And just always like choosing a different area just so it doesn't look like I've rubber stamped. Okay. All right. Cool. So yeah, that's about it for channel operations. If you guys have any final questions, please feel free to drop those into the chat. I hope this was helpful. If you have additional questions about channel operations, please drop them into the comments or into the chat, and I will address those as soon as I possibly can. Channel operations are just, it's such a rich little topic. There's so many fun things that you can do with it. If you make something cool using channel operations and you want to share that, I encourage you to tag me on Instagram, hashtag KalikaFX, KALIKAFX. And if you, I would love it if you would consider subscribing. And if you haven't already, please like this video after the live stream. All of your likes go away after the live stream's over. And all of my social channels are listed down in the description. So if you want to stay in touch, please do. All right, I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye. Thanks for joining me.